Hi everybody, welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. My name is Jim. Thanks for joining me. Time for another reading update. It's Friday, August 30th, 2024. I've been very busy with reading. I've got some books I've finished to share with you, books I'm unhauling, new acquisitions, and a recent visit to the public library. And I've started to read one of the books I borrowed from there. So anyway, let's talk about the books I've finished. This one is Haiku Mind, 108 Poems to Cultivate Awareness and Open Your Heart, edited by Patricia Donegan. It's published by Shambhala. Excellent introduction to haiku and an excellent selection of haiku. I did a whole video on this. I'll link to it in the show description. This is recommended if you're new to haiku or if you're old to haiku. You'll benefit from it. And yeah, I like this one a lot. I'm going to unhaul this one though. I'm going to drop it off at a little free library. Also finished was At the Existentialist Cafe, Freedom, Being, and Apricot Cocktails by Sarah Bakewell. This was an excellent introduction to the existentialist movement in philosophy in Europe in the 20th century. And I did another full-length video on this book too, so I won't have much to say about it. I'll link to it in the show description. Excellent introduction though, and Sarah Bakewell is an author to watch. I also finished Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. This was a Signet Classic edition. It's a little marked up, but it's good. I'm going to keep this one because it has very good notes. It has extensive excerpts from the History of the Damnable Life and Deserved Death of Dr. John Faustus, the source that Marlowe used for this play. I very much like the introductory essay by Sylvan Barnett, and I'm still toying with the idea of doing maybe a short video on this one. But you know, we'll see. Dr. Faustus is a fascinating myth, and you could go pretty deep into it. I'm not sure how deep I want to go, but this one will stay on the shelf for a while. Really enjoyed it. I also finished The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan in the Heritage Press edition, and I just posted a video on that a couple days ago. I'll link to that in the show description. What a weird, bizarre, and kind of fun read that was. Unexpectedly fun. I finished Gerald Doro, Menagerie Manor. This is a book about animals by the naturalist, conservationist, Gerald Doro. It's really the story of him setting up this private zoo on the Channel Islands. And, you know, he just talks about the personalities of all these animals and the zookeepers. And he's trying to raise awareness of endangered species and trying to preserve these species and so forth. So it was a nice, fun, lighthearted, witty read. It's sort of like watching one of those Disney films that we used to watch as kids in school about animals, or maybe they were on The Wonderful World of Disney. That sort of like that combined with like a National Geographic type of nature program, but it's the textual equivalent of that. So yeah, this was a fun read. Not a keeper. I'm gonna unhaul this to a little free library. What else? I finished just today Chaucer and the 15th Century by H.S. Bennett. This is one of the Oxford History of English Literature series, and this covers the late 14th century when Chaucer was writing up until his death, and then covers the 15th century in English literature. I'm not going to keep this. It was a tough call, but it started out well. Bennett is a good critic, a great scholar. The prose style was admirable, and it did get a little dry in spots. I thought the chapters that were about Chaucer were the best chapters in the book. And then his history of English literature in the 15th century had historical interest for sure, but he Bennett is really pretty harsh on the writers from that period. He just doesn't see anybody matching the work of Chaucer. You had a lot of people imitating Chaucer. You had a lot of people basically translating works that were coming in from Europe, especially France. And the English language was in a weird state at that point, sort of moving from Middle English to what later would become Elizabethan English. So it was a period of transition, adaptation, and there was a lot of activity in prose and poetry, but in Bennett's eyes, not so much that's very worthy. And I was surprised at how harsh he could be. Some of it was pretty entertaining criticism, but he sort of convinced me to not really read any of these other writers. We don't see many of these writers even canonized today. People like Lydgate, for instance, who was a prodigious writer, but he reads him. According to Bennett, you're not really missing much. But he does single out Thomas Malory, the Morte d'Arthur, as a sort of highlight in the 15th century, but he doesn't go too deeply into that because Malory is covered in another volume in this series more in depth. And he also singles out Caxton, William Caxton, mostly for his landmark work in printing. He published so many important books in the period. And so sort of an impressive early printer in the late 15th century. So if you're really into English literary history, these Oxford volumes are invaluable, but I'm not going to be spending a whole lot of time in scholarship on the 15th century English literature, so I think I can safely unhaul this one. I'm glad I read it, and I have several other volumes in this series. I'll probably pick up where I left off fairly soon and see what the next one holds. Okay, also books that I am currently reading. I don't have it at hand here, but I've been making some progress in Bag of Bones by Stephen King. We're starting to hit some plot points, things are kind of starting to move after 100 pages or so. What I feel like so far about that book is King is great at describing the grieving process. It's the protagonist is an author whose wife died suddenly in a parking lot, and we see him getting writer's block, but also just grieving, missing his wife terribly. And now, at this point in the novel, he's going to a place that he has avoided since his wife died, which is their house by the lake. And now he's spending some time there, and some things are starting to happen. He's also been having some nightmares. This is a Stephen King novel, after all. I'm impressed at the voice. I'm impressed at the descriptiveness, and so forth. But one thing I'm starting to pick up on, and I don't know if this is a problem with Stephen King's work. I haven't read enough of his novels to make any kind of judgment, but I feel like pacing could be a problem. Pacing might be a problem, where he just loves to sort of have his character observing things and describing things, and he's so good at it that sometimes I feel like he gets carried away, and we could maybe move the story along a little faster, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm starting to turn to that a little more often now, and I'm making some progress. Also continuing to read occasionally the John Jakes novel, The Rebels. I don't have it to show you here, but that history of the Revolutionary War, literary fiction, it's a fun read. And I'm dipping into, again, Aristotle for Everybody by Mortimer J. Adler. Adler has a very dry prose style, but he does seem to be doing a pretty good job of explaining these concepts of Aristotle, using a lot of examples and keeping it very basic. But there is a lot of redundancy in his prose style, which makes me not stick with it for too long. But in small chunks, this isn't bad. Okay, and then let's get to I guess next we'll do some acquisitions. So my wife went to Goodwill, did a little thrifting trip, and found a couple paperbacks for me. One is another Gerald Doro, the Corfu Trilogy. 3 classic tales of childhood on an island paradise. I'm going to assume that this work is what the television series may have been based on. So we have My Family and Other Animals, Birds, Beasts and Relatives, and The Garden of the Gods. And I'll read you the blurb. Just before the Second World War, the Duro family decamped to the glorious sun-soaked island of Corfu, where the youngest of the 4 children, 10-year-old Gerald, discovered his passion for animals, toads and tortoises, bats and butterflies, scorpions and octopuses. Through glorious silver-green olive groves and across brilliant white beaches, Jerry pursued his obsession, causing hilarity and mayhem in his ever-tolerant family. Darrell's memories of those enchanted days gave rise to these 3 classic tales loved by generations of adults and children alike, which are now available in 1 volume for the first time. So there it is. Nice find. I don't know how soon I'll get around to this. I'll put it on the TBR list and eventually get to it. I have a feeling that if I do finally get around to reading this, I'll probably take interest in watching the television series. And then this was a great find at the little free library. I've been getting a little bit more into exercise, doing some morning jogs and walks, sometimes a little bit of both. And I often pass by little free libraries along the way. It keeps my interest up. So I stopped at one of these a few blocks away, and I found Dune, the novel by Frank Herbert. I've been keeping my eye out for Dune. I didn't want to pay like a lot of money for it, and here I got it for free from the little free library. This is an earlier paperback edition, a movie tie-in from the first movie that was, who did this? David Lynch, I think. Yeah. That movie, as I recall, didn't get the greatest reviews. If memory serves, people thought it was sort of slow and dull. I haven't seen it. I did see the recent remake of Dune, and I had very mixed feelings about it. The first film I liked a lot. I thought it was like, it held my interest. It was very well realized, great world building, characters and actors seemed to be pretty well developed. And then the sequel to it, I thought, I just had the opposite reaction. I thought, wow, they really dragged it out. The story didn't really go very far. Things started seeming more cliche, and I was bigly disappointed in that one. But anyway, they do a good job of imagining this world that Frank Herbert has set. So I'm going to maybe read Dune fairly soon. You know, it's going to be a time investment. But now I can read Dune, and then I can start reading the sequels. I have one of the sequels. I think I got Children of Dune. It's either Dune Messiah or Children of Dune. But as one of my commenters put it, you've got to read these in order. So now I can start, because this is the first one. And then... oh, here's another paperback that my wife found at Goodwill. Jean Shepherd, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. Jean Shepherd was, I think, a great American humorist. He also had, he was a radio personality for decades. And I have very fond memories of listening to Jean Shepherd with my father. My father was a big Jean Shepherd fan, and we lived in the Philadelphia area, but sometimes we could tune in. I think it was WOR in New York City. He had a radio show, and sometimes we could tune that in, even though it was so far away. and we would enjoy listening to Gene Shepherd. And then there was some television programs featuring his short stories that we loved. And then, of course, A Christmas Story came along, and that's really his main claim to fame now, isn't it? That's become a Christmas classic. And we saw that film together when the film was released. I have great memories of watching that. I still watch it pretty much every holiday season too. But writing-wise, he's a really good writer. He can tell a story. He's a raconteur, great sense of humor. And I have a couple other of his books, and this is added to the collection. So I'll be reading some Gene Shepherd soon, I hope. And the book's in great condition. Yeah. Thank you, Stacy, for picking that up for me from the Goodwill. Okay, now let's go on to the library. I actually made it to my local public library. We walked across town to the north side of Westchester. It's actually a pretty long walk. It's maybe 15-20 minute walk. You get some good exercise, get your steps in, and it's a beautiful little library. And I borrowed 2 books there, and they're both by Sarah Bakewell. Sarah Bakewell, who wrote the Existentialist book. This is her newest book, and I'm reading it right now, Humanly Possible, 700 Years of Humanist Freethinking, Inquiry, and Hope. And I've probably got about 100 pages to go, so I'll finish this in the next day or two, I expect. And this is basically a breezy survey of humanist thinkers, roughly from the Renaissance up until the modern day. And I'll have more to say about this once I finish it. But it's easy reading, it's fun, it's very informative, there's some good anecdotes in here. I'm not sure I like it quite as much as the Existentialist Cafe, but I'll get into that after I finish it. I still do like it quite a bit, yeah, I can safely recommend it. So this is Humanly Possible. I think it came out in 2023. If anyone else has read it, let me know your thoughts on it in the comments. And then they also had Sarah Bakewell's How to Live, or A Life of Montaine, in 1 question and 20 attempts at an answer. And this, I think, was her claim to fame. This book did pretty well, if I remember. And I'm a big Montaine fan. I've read his essays I think I read the Modern Library edition. I'm pretty sure it was the Modern Library edition. He's in the Great Books of the Western World too, but I think I read the Modern Library edition. And yeah, that was a kind of a life-changing book for me. And this was maybe about 30 years ago I read it. So I'm really curious to see what she has to say about this. It'll probably reignite my interest in Montaine. Montaigne's also covered in this book too. Anyway, so those, I have those borrowed up till September 14th, and I'm going to be finished Humanly Possible really soon, so I'll probably start the Montaine book right after that. And then I think one more book to talk about today is a book I'm currently reading. I picked it up off the shelf because in the Sarah Bakewell Humanly Possible, she, in her discussion of the Renaissance thinkers, has a lot to say about Petrarch. And I have a Heritage Press edition of Petrarch's Sonnets. This is a lovely book in great condition, in a slipcase. And I'll do a book tour of this soon, but here's the title page. And it's illustrations are by Aldo Salvadori. Introduction by Thomas G. Burgin. And this is all Petrarch sonnets, so far as I can tell. And these are both pre and post Laura. Laura was the love of his life, great unrequited love. And so there's lots of lovesick sonnets to enjoy here. But the format of this book is pretty cool. So it's various translations. And so he selected different translations for each poem. And then underneath, you've got the original Italian. So if you read Italian, you can read Petrarch in his native language. I will say, and I'm about maybe close to halfway through the book, I will say that translations leave a little bit to be desired. I bet there's better translations of Petrarch out there, more modern translations. This was published in 1966. So, yeah, I mean, like, it's translating poetry is so tricky and so difficult. It's just, of all the genres of literature, I think poetry is the hardest to translate, and that's borne out by here. So that, all that being said, it's really cool to have a book of all his sonnets and to finally get around to reading this. He really sets the template for the Italian sonnet, and then not too long after, people like Shakespeare came along and adapted that form to the English language. So, yeah. One more book I'm probably going to unhaul. This was one I found in a little free library. Was Hide This French Phrase Book, which is a kind of quirky, fun phrase book for French. I don't think I'm going to be traveling to France or Quebec anytime soon, so maybe someone else needs this. A lot of the sections in here are kind of framed around like how to pick up somebody in French. So, yeah, you know, but it's a lot of, you know, your typical phrase book with, you know, basics like how to get around, how to get help, and so forth. But, yeah, also how to hit on others. Anyway, that's going to be it for today's Friday Reads. I probably left some things out. I've been very busy, but I'm also feel like I'm making progress. I think I read more books this month in August than any month all year. And yeah, it feels good. It feels good to have the time to read, and I'm really enjoying pretty much everything I'm into right now. What have you been up to lately? I hope you've had a good reading month. What are you going to be reading in September? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.